This is the Coaching Leader Podcast, a podcast about coaching, leadership, and leading through coaching. And here's your host, Scott Gress.
Welcome to the podcast. I thought it'd be especially important, especially during this time of the pandemic, to talk about culture, change, and leadership. There's some things folks know, but there's also some things that people might not know. And so I wanted to kind of hit the high spots and get a 40,000-foot view to present on each of these subjects. Hope it's helpful for you. So especially during this pandemic, culture change and leadership needs to be kept in mind and taken advantage of, really. There's some words that people have been using during this time, like everything's been turning upside down. One particular church leader I heard recently said, everything has been turned back to zero. In other words, the way that we've always been doing things, it doesn't quite fit anymore because we're back to zero. No more in-person worship, no more in-person Bible studies, and for a lot of pastors and churches, no more in-person visitation either. This might be called a kairos moment, a pregnant time, a culminating time, an opportunity time where things can be made different, where changes can be made. And as some other leaders have said, we're able to address things we never would have been able to before. Why? Because things have just been turned upside down. So what are you going to do? And how are you going to do it? How are you going to be intentional during this time of the pandemic? Or are you going to be tempted just to kind of ride it out and see where you're at the end of it? Probably not the best strategy. But what's this thing called culture anyway? Culture has been simplistically defined as the way we do things around here. You often hear that word culture thrown around as kind of a general description of that way an organization or a church and ministry does things that's different from another organization. But some better words that you can use to describe culture might be the personality of the organization or the climate of the church or organization. As personality is to an individual person, so also is culture to an organization, or that climate, that environment in which you find yourself operating. You've got to pay attention to it. If it's raining, you got to wear a raincoat and so forth. So if the culture or climate of an organization is a certain way, you need to be aware of it and you need to respond appropriately rather than responding in a knee-jerk fashion or inappropriately, which can bring all kinds of negative results. But as Corporate Culture and Survival Guide 3rd edition defines it, culture is a multifaceted learned structure and practice of leaders and followers who work together and build a history that shapes the future. Culture includes things like behavior, rituals and rites, your values, your espoused values, the deep and taken for granted assumptions which give all of these things meaning. Culture is also nurtured by how the group is managed, by daily behaviors, by incentive systems, and by what's paid attention to, and also by the same token what's ignored, and also what's measured. As you go through all of these things, it has its effect on people, it has its effect on practices, it has its effect on that personality and that climate of the organization. If management is always nervous and anxious about getting things done, then people are going to be nervous and anxious. If the leader doesn't care, then maybe people won't care. And put all those things together, and it results in the climate or the culture of an organization. In a young organization, leadership creates culture through behaviors and successes. They go about doing things, they achieve a success. Internally, maybe even unconsciously, they say to themselves, hey, that worked well. Let's keep on doing things like that or keep doing that. And so you begin to create this personality that shapes who you are and what you do. And in a midlife or older organization, the culture constrains what's acceptable leadership. In other words, there's resistance. So if the original leader years later decides, hey, we got to change things around here, unconsciously, the people who've been around, even the people who haven't been around but have kind of adopted this culture and these attitudes and assumptions, will find themselves resisting what the existing leader is doing differently. There's this sort of pressure to maintain the status quo and to maintain the sameness. Or if a new leader comes in, hey, wait a minute, don't mess up my sameness. This is the way we do things around here. This is our culture. Now, they might not say that explicitly, but that might be what is felt and the reaction. And culture is multi-layered and multifaceted. There's the macro culture that takes into account the whole organization or a whole ministry. Then there's other parts, maybe the way you get work done, the task or work culture, the social culture, how you relate to one another. In the organizational chart, who's more important, who's less important, the pecking order, the way in which you maybe pal around or hang out with one another during the workday or after the workday or on the weekends. Plus, there's numerous subcultures or microcultures. In a church, there's the staff, maybe the elders, maybe the group that gets together for cards or in people's homes for social activities. Maybe there's a fellowship board. There's the choir that does things a certain way. There's other people who maybe have some informal groups, but they've exerted power and influence in the church for a long time. All of those things, those microcultures and subcultures, create what's called that macro culture of the organization or of the ministry. But as you think about changing culture or creating change in any kind of organization, what's really the impetus or reason for an organization to change? Can you think of any change that was not the result of something negative? You probably can't, because if things are going well, then why change? But usually it's something negative that comes about, some kind of destabilizing event, like a pandemic, or maybe a budget shortfall, and then people kind of wake up and realize, hey, we got to do something about that. We got to deal with this. Maybe an employee shakeup. Maybe somebody retires that you didn't think was going to retire. Maybe they move away. Maybe there was a death. Maybe somebody left under unfortunate circumstances. All those things are a disruption that creates a change or an opportunity for a change that the organization needs to respond to. But the question is, how are you going to respond? And the problem is that, as I've been alluding to, all people groups attempt to maintain equilibrium or predictability or stability, or as some refer to it, a homeostasis. The creation of culture helps to make that happen. People like to know what they're in for and what's going to happen, what they can expect. And so there's this pressure, unconscious or not, where people don't want things to be different. And there's the desire for sameness, even if things are uncomfortable, because the devil you know can often be more appealing than the devil that you don't know. You think about people who stay in abusive relationships. That's an example. So if over time, an organization or in a church, things shift or go bad from either internal forces or external forces, then there'll be a defense mechanism to keep things the same. What's an example? Well, for example, if the church is dying, if you look around on Sunday morning and there's less people, there's maybe some very good reasons for that. But instead of looking at the logical reasons, sometimes people can decide, well, you know, people are on vacation, or, oh, they go to the lake house, or they're just taking some time off, or so-and-so's sick. So they excuse themselves from the deep thinking of that awareness and allow themselves to live in denial that things are worse than they'd like them to be. And they might even resist change because of it. Yet true leadership, as we move into that leadership piece, will persist in love. The man in the picture there on the screen, his name is Edgar Schein. Sat at his feet during a sabbatical in 2008. He's from MIT, got a wonderful history of being really a pioneer in culture and change and leadership. And he began his career right out of college, newly minted PhD, I believe, by debriefing Korean War prisoners who at the time, if you didn't know, were accused of being brainwashed by their captors. And he sat down with them to try to figure out what happened. Why did they undergo this change? And instead of really peppering them with questions, he just asked, tell me your story, so that they could feel free to introduce that. A fascinating man who I spoke to him at a break, and he even said that he was baptized as an infant, a Lutheran. Not sure whether he stayed a Lutheran. One of his parents was apparently Lutheran. But he says that an organization won't change unless they undergo some kind of survival anxiety. There's that negative thing that will bring about disequilibrium. It's a motivation to change that produces that sufficient anxiety. But then immediately an organization experiences learning anxiety. In other words, oh no, we're going to die. Oh no, even worse, how are we going to fix it? They don't know because they've always done it a certain way. Have you ever heard that before in a church? We've always done it this way. Well, there's learning anxiety. I don't know how to think. I don't know how to behave any differently. And so learning requires unlearning. It requires learning new patterns of thinking and the resulting behaviors. And then he says successful change efforts require an ingredient called psychological safety. That when there's a viable way forward that's explained, that includes a vision, a compelling vision, maybe formal training of how those behaviors can change, how you can think differently, some coaching to walk with people along the way, providing positive role models. See, so-and-so did it, you can do the same thing, or this is how they did it, maybe you can learn from them. Providing support groups and so forth, that's what is really needed for change efforts. And he says, most change efforts don't really work because they don't provide this third ingredient, so critical, of a fish swimming upstream. That's leadership during a time of change. So when a destabilizing event is done intentionally, it's called an intervention. A self-study, a consultant coming in, when an employee is dismissed, that's an intentional intervention. Things aren't right. We need to make a fix. We need to let somebody go. Maybe we need to hire somebody. And positive change requires leadership to persist in realizing that compelling new vision, that new culture, that new stability that will replace that old homeostasis and stability. So a leader, you could summarize, is really a positive irritant in it all. Yet, this leadership that produces change is measured. It's not just a bull in a china shop. It really asks the question, well, how hot do we want to make it? And Heifetz and Lewinsky, those folks who have pioneered a lot of work in adaptive leadership from Harvard, they say leadership is about disappointing your people at a rate they can absorb, chipping away at that stability, at that homeostasis at a rate that can absorb, probably also providing anchors, as it were, things that people can hold on to while the change is happening. So depending upon the severity of the intervention and the amount of speed of change, there will be varying degrees of resistance. Resistance? Yes, because people want predictability. Remember, they don't want things to change. And behind that predictability and resistance is the fear of loss, losing how you know how to do things, the fear of feeling incompetent because things are all new. We're back to that zero that was talked about before. Fear of the unknown. I don't know what this future holds. It's a path that I haven't walked before. Or even a fear of failure. Other kinds of resistance are, well, I don't get it. I don't get why we're changing. That means they don't have enough survival anxiety. I don't get it. I don't understand the change. And oftentimes people will say they don't get it when what they're really saying is, I don't like it. Or maybe even, I don't like you. And unfortunately, often people who lead in change hear that, and so they continue to answer that, oh, they don't get it yet. They don't get it yet. But they're missing the wrong target, because it's not that they don't get it. It's that they don't like it. And maybe they don't even like you. So you need to be wise as serpents and innocent as doves in this change effort. So some leadership truths for change are, first, together, doing it together, not top down, clarify and affirm or reaffirm your purpose. We're here to blank. Why are we even bothering to gather together here on 3rd and Maple? Whatever your address is or whatever you do things. Why are we doing this? What's our purpose? Get people to become clear about that once again. This will help bring about unity and build consensus. And always work as much as possible with and through people when you're making the change, so that it won't be perceived as top down. And the truth is that if you allow people to weigh in along the way, participate in the discussion, give ideas, talk about the concerns, if they weigh in, even if the solution or the answer isn't what they like, they'll be more willing to buy in because they were included in the process. They'll perceive it to be fair. And they won't perceive it to be from one person that they don't like, for example, but we came about this together, and they want to be part of that team. So co-create small wins that align with the change to build that new culture. The one culture is getting torn down. This new culture is being built. And so you want to continue to share the stories about what's being done. What did Todd do? What did Jane do? What did Martha's group do? Sharing that story and how that aligns with that purpose. And you'll be able to build momentum towards that new future. As things go bad, as there's resistance, as there's problems, address them early. Admit failure. We're experimenting. Didn't go so well. But what did we learn? Sort of thing. Things will only grow if you ignore them. So leaders have that courage to face up to those things and talk about them out loud. And whenever possible, change by addition rather than subtraction. The old example in churches is about a worship service. Don't get rid of the traditional, but add the contemporary, and continue to love people. Don't get rid of that. Don't get rid of that favorite board or committee. Add another task force or another group to do something. Change by addition rather than subtraction. And remember the wave. Take a look at that picture that you see there. That was on some previous slides. And Dr. Shine talks about the wave being the efforts of leadership crashing on the shore of culture. Some things are rocks. They're just not going to change very quickly. Other things are sand, and they'll wash away. But it's always that effort of bringing forth leadership. So I hope that this has been helpful to give you sort of a 40,000-foot view of culture, change, and leadership. Reach out to me as maybe one of those elements you want to process further or talk about further. I'd be happy to get with you by telephone, email, or in-person meeting and work that thing through further. You can check out some other things from me through a Christian Coaching Guidebook coming alongside others for Ministry Results, a book about coaching. My YouTube channel. We hope to provide online coach training this fall through the Florida Georgia District, so reach out to them. And then also check out the Coaching Leader podcast. And you can see my also information there on LinkedIn and Instagram. And the website, scottgress.com. And reach out to me through my email, scottgress@me.com. Well, thanks for tuning in, and we hope to catch up to you next time on The Coaching Leader.